doing things that you wouldn't do if it were just a job, if it were just something that you're trying to get out there quickly.
Yeah.
Building in those special details that make your customers' lives just that little bit easier and helping them get by.
Yeah.
And if they can get a little bit of joy from using your product, then why not?
Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools. I'm joined today by Anurag Goel, who is the founder and CEO of Render. And Render is, to my understanding, is kind of AWS, but like way simpler. So anything you can do with like AWS, but easier. And I've tried it out a little while ago, and it was like super easy to use. So it's really exciting to have you on.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and talk more about what we're doing at Render and about anything that your listeners might find interesting.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And so I guess we're going to talk about, to give people background, we're going to talk about Render, we can talk about developer experience, and we're also going to talk about your time as the 8th employee at Stripe.
Yes,
so
certainly.
Yeah. So let's kick things off, and it'd be great to hear a bit about like how you came to the idea of building Render.
Yeah. So it started even back when I had just joined Stripe. 4 engineers, and one of them was dedicated to managing AWS. And as the company grew, the percentage of people dedicated to managing AWS as a total part of the engineering team continued to almost stay the same. And in the end, Stripe was spending, when I left Stripe in 2016, Stripe was probably spending millions of dollars in salary and equity for people who were mostly just managing AWS servers and helping Stripe scale. So after I left in 2016, because I'd been there a while, from 2011 to 2016, it was time for me to take a little bit of a break and figure out what I really wanted to do next. And my goal for whatever it was going to be was to find an incredibly hard, ambitious problem that is really interesting to me, interesting enough for me to spend several decades on. And the way I went about doing that is building applications in a lot of different domains to try to figure out if my excitement lasted beyond just the original excitement of the idea, and putting these applications online. And through that work, I realized that despite all the improvements in the fundamental underlying technologies of cloud infrastructure, the developer experience was still heavily broken. I had to go through the same set of things on AWS just to get something even moderately complex deployed. And I wasn't able to do even, a lot of the things that I was trying to do to put them online, I just wasn't able to do on existing platforms like Heroku. So it was pretty clear to me from working with low-level cloud technology that it was time to build towards a new way of running applications in the cloud, one that allowed people to experience the power and the flexibility of the things that the cloud can offer without them having to go build out large DevOps teams and large Kubernetes clusters and large AWS presences themselves. And so that's really how Render came about. And the company started in 2018. We launched publicly in 2019 at TechCrunch Disrupt Battlefield, which we won. And it's been one day at a time from there.
That's awesome. Was it like in Silicon Valley, the TV show, in TechCrunch Battlefield?
It was kind of like that, but with less drama. Certainly less drama, and it was kind of surreal, of course, because we'd all seen the show, and we were just 4 people back then, and just getting on stage and pitching Render, and Ashton Kutcher was there, and there's a bunch of other.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was an interesting experience. It really helped put Render on the scene, certainly, and the interesting thing was back then we didn't really have a ton of features. Obviously, we were talking about 2019, right, early on when we were just launching. But since then, we've focused really hard on building a capable, complex, performance, scalable platform that allows you to do whatever you would do on AWS, but much faster, and most of it is automated.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. At some point, you're going to land a big customer and they're going to ask you for enterprise features. That's where WorkOS comes in because they give you these features out the box. Features like skim provisioning, SAML authentication, and audit logs. They have an easy-to-use API and they're trusted by big dev tools like Vercel, as well as smaller, fast-growing dev tools like Knock. So if you're looking to cross the enterprise chasm and make yourself enterprise ready, check out WorkOS. We've also done an episode with Michael, the founder of WorkOS, where he shares a lot of tips around crossing the enterprise chasm, landing your first enterprise deals, and making sure that you're ready for them. Thanks, WorkOS, for sponsoring the podcast, and back to the show. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting challenge that you've got where it's like you want to make it really easy to use, and like, you know, there are tools that are like easy to use. You know, I think Heroku did a good job there, like in terms of being fairly easy to use. But then it's like you run into these limitations, and it's like it's not really like a, you know, if you want to do what you can do with AWS, you're going to have to like migrate away from it. And so you're trying to like, it seems like a super interesting, difficult challenge to actually create something that has like those capabilities, but then of like AWS, but then is as easy to use as something like a Heroku or.
Yeah. I think the core insight there was by building these applications in the cloud myself, using modern frameworks and using the latest advances in infrastructure tech like containers and Kubernetes, it became pretty clear to me that the industry was still operating at the level of VMs. And when AWS came on the scene, they said, okay, we're going to take your capital expenditure from the data center away and turn it into operating expenses. And that was a pretty big innovation back in the day. But they didn't really change who they were building for. AWS has always built for low-level systems people. Or you need to become a low-level systems person to truly build things on AWS. But most of the 100 million developers out there are not that, and they don't want to be that. But they still want to build applications. And as it becomes easier and easier to build more applications online, it is the ease of use of putting them online, but more importantly, scaling them in complexity, not just in traffic. That hasn't changed at the same rate. And so that's what Render's building. And in many ways, it's a new way to think about how to build large, complex applications on the cloud. And we've seen that happen because at this point, Render has 1.5 million developers on the platform, and we're adding a very large number every month. And then we're also now focused on continuing to grow our customers. So we have customers who started out on Render with just spending $30 a month, and now they're spending between $1 and $2 million a year. And they've grown on Render. All their compute is on Render. The company's hundreds of people, their company, and they love what Render is doing. And our goal is to continue to have them grow on Render. And there's lots of stories like that.
Yeah. So how, like, because it sounds like so difficult. So how do you build something that is great for someone paying $30 a month, and then is also great for someone, that same company, when they're paying like millions?
It all comes down to customer focus. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but that's truly what it is. I think at Render, we've obsessed about customer focus from day one. And our goal is to make sure we solve your problems in the best way possible for you. We're not trying to sell you a specific way of building applications. So we're not saying, oh, build a front-end app with a serverless backend, or go, build your app with AWS Lambda serverless. We want to help you build your application the way you want to build it. We want to help you grow your infrastructure, your cloud presence, the way you want to grow it. And so when you think about problems from that lens, instead of trying to make everything fit in a box, which you see with a lot of these tools that make it easy to get started, you then make product decisions very differently. You try to figure out what the right levers are to give people in terms of the flexibility and the scalability that they want as they grow. And that's an ongoing discussion with our customers. And we have um, uh, these Slack channels with some of our largest customers where the discussion is all about like, hey, how can we help you build the next level of your application? And so we are always trying to be 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of where our customers are today, so they can continue to grow on Render. And increasingly, we found that the things that we build for these growing customers are equally interesting and important for enterprises that are already large but not yet using Render. And so we're starting to see larger companies, larger enterprises moving new workloads to Render, but also in some cases moving things from GCP, AWS, Kubernetes clusters over to Render because they get the same functionality that you would get from Kubernetes without dealing with Kubernetes at all.
Yeah. Have you got any examples of how you kind of did that, where someone was asking, like, how you kind of realized that a feature was needed to be built, and then how you kind of built that while also keeping the really strong developer experience?
Absolutely. So I think it depends on, again, understanding your customer incredibly well, but not just a given customer, making sure you have a very, very clear understanding of the customer segments you're building for and how they use the platform. So there are people who want that ease of use getting started, and the dashboard is great for them. And they continue to build applications entirely through the dashboard. They monitor them on the dashboard. But then there are folks who, for example, want to connect privately to an AWS service like SageMaker that Render doesn't offer. Now, if we had all of that in the dashboard from the get-go, pretty much like AWS does, where there's these 300 services that are in your face as soon as you log in, that would be very different. Our goal is, one way to think about this, and the term we often use internally, is progressive disclosure of complexity. So if you don't see the complexity until you need it, and even when you do need it, it doesn't have to be through the same interface. So you don't have to build literally everything in the dashboard. If more complex customers, again, going back to the understanding, if more complex customers are able to use the API or Render's Terraform provider to get that feature, then that's where you would want to put it instead of complicating your UI.
That's really interesting. So sorry, so it's progressive disclosure of complexity. That's a really cool phrase.
Of course. Yeah.
And so how do you decide if something is important enough or relevant enough to go in the basic UI, or if where this fits on the progressive scale, I guess?
So by default, we want everything to be available in the UI. It might not be available just like the first thing you log in. You might have to. So there's a lot of decisions we make around information architecture in the dashboard, and we're continuously improving it. So we figure out sort of what the user is trying to do. At the end of the day, you map your user journeys, and the product managers out there know all of this stuff really well. I've never been a full-time product manager, but I'm definitely a product guy. I'm an engineer and a product person. And I think I've always done informally what product managers have formal terms for. And it's the same for the amazing product people at our company who have joined, who have now taken on the mantle of the product, even though I'm obviously pretty involved. So the way we think about this is, what is the customer trying to do? Who is the customer and what are they trying to do? And then you have to kind of, in the dashboard at least, you have to make sure that any new toggle you add, you think really hard about that. Like, is this actually a setting that a customer needs to see or use in the dashboard? Especially most of the time, Render is all about sensible defaults, things that you just never have to even think about. You shouldn't have to, for example, configure HTTP to HTTPS redirection on your website. It should just be that. You shouldn't have to configure compression for your application responses. They should just be part of the platform. So stuff like that everyone kind of has to do, you make invisible. You just do it. There's no configuration. So even today, if you really wanted to host an HTTP only website on Render, we refuse to do it. We think it's insecure. Yes, I'm sure there are use cases for it because you have some clients that don't yet speak HTTPS. But you know what? That's okay. We're not building for those clients. We're building for customers who are building with modern frameworks and applications, and customers who want to build with modern frameworks and applications. And in that world, insecure HTTP just has no place. And so we just made the decision to automatically redirect HTTP to HTTPS. And even when people have asked us, hey, can you allow me to serve pure HTTP? We've said no, and we've stuck to it. And obviously, that hasn't harmed the company in sort of any meaningful way, but it has made the UI experience better for everyone else, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to take every decision from a lot of different lenses and figure out what the right flow looks like. How does it fit into the bigger picture? And again, going back to an example, so you can imagine that there are certain things that people want to do through a Terraform provider that don't need to be on the dashboard because this is configuration that they can write up, right? So instead of just clicking through things, this is configuration, and Render also has its own infrastructure as code format. So again, if you're using those things, then maybe it's easier for you to apply certain customizations that are only available through those text formats instead of on the dashboard. So that's kind of how we think about it.
That makes sense. So sensible defaults, and you're kind of being opinionated about like helping people to build modern, secure applications.
Exactly.
That makes sense. And I guess that would massively reduce the complexity of the dashboard right there with all those defaults, because you can just take all that stuff out the way.
Exactly.
And people,
and I think that's often what I've seen competitors stumble on, where they think that to give people the flexibility of AWS, they need to put every single feature, every single knob or toggle in there. That's not the case. Customers don't actually want it. They just want their applications to run well. They want them to scale. They want them to be secure. They want them to be available. And so that's what we focus on instead of giving people every single little thing. And so in that sense, Render is really built for people who are companies, businesses that are focused on building their businesses and their products as opposed to trying to mess with every single thing in the cloud.
Yeah, that actually helps me understand it way better, because it's like, when you hear like, okay, so we want to have the power and we want to have the simplicity, it's always like, okay, but the power comes with, like it's like these things are like almost like opposites in a sense in some ways, but then it makes sense where it's like you're saying, okay, but we're just going to remove like half of this power doesn't need to be, displayed to you. It just needs to be like done automatically. So we've just like massively reduced the scope of configuration.
Yeah.
But you can still configure all the things that actually matter to be configured.
Exactly. And so in that sense, I think obviously Render works for maybe 95% of the businesses out there. If you're building a low-level infrastructure company yourself, Render is not for you, because you need those little knobs and toggles, and that's where I think AWS and GCP and Azure, they continue to do a good job exposing literally everything there is to expose, and we use those cloud providers too to give our users the power of the larger hyperscalers, but they don't have to think about them. They don't have to tweak anything themselves. They don't have to worry about thousands and thousands of lines of configuring Kubernetes YAML and looking at 1,000 vendors in the Kubernetes ecosystem, trying to figure out which one they should integrate. It's all renders an end-to-end, all-in-one product that gives you kind of the best parts of the cloud.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Yeah. And when you talk about, you were kind of speaking earlier about speaking to your customers and like kind of going with your customers, like on a day-to-day basis, like what does it look like to actually speak to your customers? Because it feels like it's something that it's like, everyone hears like speak to your customers.
Yeah.
But what does it actually mean?
Fundamentally, it means having a lot of empathy for your users, making sure you understand what they're trying to do instead of assuming what they're trying to do.
Mm.
And what that means is just continuing to ask a lot of questions, not trying to fit their needs into necessarily what you have, but thinking about what could be and how you can evolve your platform to meet, again, going back to like meet the needs that they have, as opposed to, sometimes they want a specific feature done a specific way. And you're like, well, actually, what are you really trying to do? And so I think customer research is a skill that everyone can develop. And, I have my own blind spots there. But for me, this is why I started Render. My customers are developers. I'm a developer. I love talking to other developers. I love talking about the ways a Render can help solve their problems. I love just talking about, things that developers talk about, because I enjoy that. That's who I am at my core. And so I think it gives me a bit of an advantage in terms of how I interact with our customers. And then when you look at some of the other people we've hired at Render, again, all of them have been incredibly technical, even if they're not full-time engineers at Render themselves. They've been engineers elsewhere, or in their past, they've written code. And so they truly understand what it means to solve customer problems through code, through the platform, through technology. And you have to engage them in multiple ways. So our customer support engineering team, our customer support team, we only have customer support engineers. We don't have customer support people. So every person you talk to through Render support, and we actually offer free email support to everyone, regardless of who they are, whether they're paying us or not. And very few people actually do that. And the reason we do that is, again, going back to how can we continue to learn from our customers, what their problems are, how we can solve them. And it's not easy, but if it were easy, anyone could do it. And we're trying to solve a hard problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it'd be really fun to talk about the customer support, because I actually don't know if we've really covered that much. And like, I just wondered, like, what does it look like to like set up that kind of system of customer support, even like the kind of boring details of like, I guess you use like some kind of software to like assign
Zendesk or
Zendesk.
Intercom. Yeah. So it has evolved, obviously, over the years. And I think back in the day when we started, we just had an open Slack for everyone. And people would send us their private details in public Slack channels, and we're like, no, don't do that. And then we also had a shared Gmail inbox. And when you're really small, you kind of you figure this out, and it's manageable. But like I said, Render now has 1.5 million developers on the platform, and the goal with customer support isn't just to answer their questions; it's to continue to improve self-serve help. So what that means is, if we're very thoughtful now about the kind of documentation, the kind of in-product tooltips and flows that we need that reduce the number of times anyone has to actually talk to us. And behind the scenes these days, we use Zendesk, but we might be, I don't know if I'm spilling any of our beans here, but I think we're moving from Zendesk to Intercom because of some of the AI features that Intercom has built in that will allow us to better handle very large volumes of tickets, not by like giving people automated responses, but by surfacing useful information sooner. And so, people talk about how AI is changing the world. I mean, certainly it's changing customer support, and it's helping us be more efficient with a very small team. And like I said, we have a large number of developers on the platform, but I think we only have 8 customer support engineers, and we're still able to offer incredible support to everyone, not just people who pay us money.
Yeah, wow, that's actually pretty astounding, actually, because people ask a lot of questions, right?
Yeah, we also have a lot of forums, and I think when you grow beyond a certain size, then developers are familiar with your product, and people help each other out. And so we obviously benefit a lot from our increased scale now, where when someone asks a question about render online, whether it's on Stack Overflow or in some community, a forum or Twitter, people jump in and they try to answer because they've used render before. And that will continue to grow. And, people talk about network effects for companies. That's certainly a great network effect for developer focused companies when you don't have to have someone from render answer every single thing. Having said that, a few people in the company monitor everything that is being said online in public forums about render, simply because we know that is how customers sometimes just ask for support. And so we make sure that if someone has a question about render online, then we jump in, give them the information that they need, and then again continue to improve our systems in terms of documentation, in terms of the how the product guides you, in terms of the error messages. That the error messages are such an overlooked part of any system. In terms of when your build is running and it fails, like what are the logs that you show people? Like those things make a huge difference in terms of your overall experience with the system. When things are going fine, everything is fine. It really comes down to how well the system does when you break something in your app or your so our goal is to focus on those troubleshooting moments as well. How can we give you the information that you need to troubleshoot your application in a way that gets you up and running as fast as possible?
Yeah. And when people are like doing support, I've kind of done some of this myself, just like casually, and like is it just answer the question? Is it like, I guess it's just like the obvious way to do it is just like help them solve the problem.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much like, is there any like advanced like Jedi stuff that we should be thinking about? Or
no, again, it goes back to having empathy for the user, making sure that you're not, again, making assumptions about their problem. And I think even at Stripe, again, we were incredibly focused on giving people a great experience through every channel. And so one way to think about customer support is it is part of your product. So how would you product manage it? How would you run customer support if you actually truly considered it to be a part of your product experience?
Yeah.
When you think about it that way, then it opens up a lot of new ways to handle customer support inquiries, and sometimes even before it becomes an inquiry, right? So thinking about support as a product, thinking about the people who are on your team who are responsible for customers, for helping customers, thinking about them the same way you think about any other engineer at the company. I think that makes it very different. That makes the customer experience very different. That's why we're able to service so many people with such a small team.
Yeah. And actually, that's a good segue onto Stripe as well.
Sure.
So I'd love to kind of ask you what it was like. So I guess was it you were all just like in a room when you joined?
Pretty
like,
much, yeah.
Patrick and
yeah. So we were in this tiny office in Palo Alto when I joined, and we were all sitting around a single table that it was not much bigger than this conference room table I'm at now. And the vibe was really great. I was a Stripe customer well before I became a Stripe employee. So I started using Stripe back in 2010 when it was called /dev/payments. And I was one of the few people who were using it to run a real business. And I think, a real business is debatable. It was a side project for me, but I did need payments for this side project, and no one would give me payments. They were like, "Oh, you need to be VC funded, or you need to put the PayPal button on your site." And Stripe just made it so easy for me to get started, even back in 2010, that I became a fan, and then I started giving them a ton of product feedback. And the product wasn't great back then, to be honest. And Obviously, we fixed all of that. We launched publicly in 2011, September 2011, which was great. It was a great launch. I think it was um, the highest voted launch on Hacker News for the longest time. And I think if you adjust for Hacker News users and vote inflation, like I think it might still be the top launch on Hacker News of all time. And I'm really excited that I was incredibly excited that I was part of that moment. I'd written the Stripe tutorial, the very first Stripe tutorial. That
really,
yeah, that was one of the first things I did when I got there. And I was an engineer, but they needed a tutorial, so I was like, all right, well, my job is to write a tutorial, so I did that. And I remember how the tutorial was the most popular page when we launched, and we were all watching the metrics on this large screen. And it was just like a bunch of people sitting around a table being really excited about their startup launch on Hacker News. We had no idea it was going to become the company that it has become today. But again, it came down to hiring the best people, making sure that we're constantly focused on customers, being very close to them, and thinking outside the box. I think all of those things made Stripe successful in ways that obviously involved some luck. There's always luck with any big startup success. But I think the team that Patrick and John built early on, I would say that was perhaps the biggest reason Stripe was successful from the beginning.
Did it feel like this is different? This is like a incredible team.
Yes, although I will say that it was still just like working with any of the startup team. Obviously, the people I was working with were great, and one way to think about how things were at the time was to look at maybe other startups in the same space and their teams, and it was pretty clear that our team was much more accomplished and was able to get a lot more done, had a lot more craft, which is so incredibly important for developer products. And I'm really just talking about the first 10 or 15 people, and obviously we continue to hire great people after then too. But that was a really special time, and I think in any company's evolution, when you're just a few people sitting around a table, there's no better time. It's so different, and obviously, the world is different now with hybrid and remote teams. I think remote teams can be very effective, but it's just not the same as just sitting around a table, just getting stuff done and slinging code, talking to customers. We used to use HipChat back then, talking about support tools, which was really interesting. And I learned a lot, and I think we all learned a lot about building a company because it was new to all of us.
Yeah, and were there things where you were, when you're starting Render, you were like, I want to take this part from Stripe?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we, like I said, focused obsessively on developers and on the end user experience and on building craft into the product, on having the best documentation. All of those things were part and parcel of the culture that I knew I had to build at Render. And the other big thing was just thinking about things from first principles, not cargo culting, being very thorough about your reasoning and then executing really quickly. So this is actually one of our operating principles now: reason clearly, execute quickly. It's on our website. If you go to render.com/about, I think, or render.com/careers. And we still feel really strongly about it because we found that certain problems just require thinking through at a very deep level if you truly want to build a world-class solution. And what we're trying to do here is not easy, and so we have to approach problems in ways that are new and unique. And sometimes the solution is out there, but most of the time you have to kind of adapt to exactly what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think you've said craft now twice. I want to actually dig into craft because I'd love to hear what you think that is and how you think about that.
I think craft is about, at its core, taking pride in your work and doing things that you um, wouldn't do if it were just a job, if it were
Mm,
just something that you're trying to get out there quickly. Um,
yeah.
and what that means is building in those special details that make your
Mm,
customers' lives just that little bit easier,
mm,
and helping them. Everyone's just trying to do stuff and
yeah.
get by, and if they can get a little bit of joy from using your product, um, then why not?
Yeah.
And that joy comes from going beyond what they would expect,
Mm,
and making sure that you're focused on the right level of polish,
mm,
and then you spend the time to make that happen. um, as an extreme example of that, when Stripe launched, um, there was a cloud on the homepage that had gears inside it. And I don't know if this was the best um, thing to do, but our designer at the time spent, I think, weeks or months just building that cloud.
really.
And obviously not like,
Yeah.
months working on just that, but his obsession around like how things should look,
Yeah.
and how everything fits in. And the same thing applied to the API, the same thing applied to the docs, and it's the same thing for render. Like, how do things look and feel, but also
Mm,
how do we anticipate what people want to do, and we surprise them by
mm,
having thought of it already, or we give them a tiny bit of um, joy in using your platform. I think craft is a lot about that, but that's also at a much higher level. I think craft also, for something like render, craft comes down to how do we make sure that your applications are reliable at all times? How do we anticipate these edge cases
mm,
that might cause your application to fail? And you never learn about that kind of craft behind the scenes. But that goes into what we do every day. It's not just what you
mm,
see on the dashboard or on the API or the CLI. It's also about um, taking pride in building the kind of complex, scalable, flexible, performance, secure architecture that powers these millions of applications on Render.
yeah. That's amazing. I think we've got time for just one last question, Anurag.
Go for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've been a part of like a very, very early part of arguably the most successful developer tool, and now you've built Render, which as you said, has millions of users, is like doing incredibly well. If you're speaking to someone who is at the beginning of their like developer tools journey as a founder, what are the like is there something you would say to them that you think like just focus on this?
Well, first, I would ask them why they're doing what they're doing. Um, I think it's incredibly important to find founder market fit. And sometimes just because it's a good idea, it makes your life a little bit easier, um, and you like it at the time. Um, Sometimes that could turn into a company, but more often than not, it's not what actually, uh, it's not what you might want to do over a period of a
Mm,
decade. And at the end of the day, I think all startups are hard. It doesn't matter what you're building. All startups are hard, and you really need to care about the problem that you're trying to solve
mm,
to be able to sustain the energy that you need as a founder, as a CEO, or as even as an early employee to uh, to take the good with the bad, and make sure that you care deeply about what you're building, and you care deeply about who you're building it for,
mm.
and have that empathy. Because if you don't have that, you're probably going to get tired much sooner and quit when you hit your first major obstacle.
Yeah, that's I think that seems like such good advice. It's just enjoy it, I guess, in the sense of like do something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but at least it won't be um, because you didn't care enough.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, where can people learn more about you and about Render?
Oh, render.com. And
Nice.
it's pretty straightforward. You can find Render on Twitter, on X at x.com/render. Search for Render on LinkedIn. You'll find us. And you'll find us as soon as you mention the word render anywhere online. We'll try to
Your
find you.
team is going to find it.
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining, Anurag. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.